The rain had been falling for hours, not the kind that crashes and roars, but the quiet kind. The kind that taps gently on old windows, slips between rooftops, and makes the world feel like it is holding its breath. Outside, the city glowed dimly under a sky the color of faded steel. Inside a small apartment on the 13th floor, a man named Jareth sat alone with a cup of cold coffee and no reason to leave. The room was silent. Books lined the walls. A small garden grew by the window, stubborn little sprouts of green pushing through recycled soil. The lights above flickered sometimes, not because of a storm, but because no one ever came to fix them anymore. Jareth did not mind. He was used to silence. He had no family left, no friends who still called. Only old memories and the distant hum of a life once larger than the four walls he now called home. He stared out the window, watching the water trickle down the glass in crooked lines. Then it came. A soft chime echoed through the room. His communicator, long thought broken, blinked once, then glowed a faint blue. Jareth frowned. No one had contacted him in years. He reached for it slowly, tapping the screen like it might vanish if touched too hard. Encrypted message received. Origin, Sirius Prime. His heart skipped. Sirius Prime. That was the home of Kalis, his old friend, an alien diplomat, someone Jareth had once saved long ago during a mission most had forgotten. They had stayed in touch for years after. Letters, quiet jokes, philosophical debates across systems. But then the messages stopped. He thought the friendship had simply faded, but now the screen lit up, and a face appeared. Kalis. His eyes looked tired. His voice was low. If you are seeing this, my friend, then I am no longer alive. Jareth sat up. I do not trust the council. I do not trust my own people. But I trust you. Everything I own, my home, my vault, my secrets, and my bond partner Solera, is now yours. Jareth blinked. Bond partner? Kalis continued. Travel to Sirius Prime. Go to my estate. The officials will know what to do. But be careful. Not everyone will be happy to see a human claiming a Sirius inheritance. Some will want you dead. Some will want her. The message ended. The screen faded. And for a long moment, Jareth just sat there. The rain had stopped, but his world had already shifted. He did not move. He did not breathe. Until a knock on the door. He stood slowly, unsure what he expected. He opened it. A tall man in a black coat stood in the hallway. Human, but something in his eyes felt wrong. Cold. Mr. Jareth, the man said, we are here to escort you to the shuttle port. The late Kalis left specific instructions. You are expected. Jareth hesitated. How did you get here so fast? The man smiled. We have been watching. Your journey begins now. That night, as the shuttle broke through Earth's atmosphere, Jareth sat in the back, staring out into the stars. He played the message again, listened to Kalis's voice, felt the weight of words he never asked for. A home, a vault, a bond, and one phrase that echoed louder than the rest. Trust no one. The shuttle drifted down like a falling feather, silent and smooth through the clouds of Sirius Prime. Jareth stood at the viewport, eyes wide. Below him stretched a world that looked like it had been painted by starlight. Oceans glowed pale blue beneath drifting silver clouds. Forests shimmered with bioluminescent vines, their canopies moving in slow, almost dreamlike patterns. And rising from the land like spires of frozen time were the towers of the Sirius capital, made not of metal, but of translucent crystal that caught the sun and turned it into fire. The shuttle AI spoke softly. Approaching Kalis' estate, prepare for descent. Jareth sat back down, heart pounding. He still didn't understand how he had ended up here. Just 2 days ago, he was no one. A forgotten man with a cracked window and a half-dead garden. Now he was flying into a world he did not know, to meet a woman he had never spoken to, and to claim a legacy he did not want. The shuttle landed with a whisper. The doors opened. Waiting for him were 5 tall figures, Syrians, pale-skinned, graceful. Their eyes glowed faintly in the shadows of the landing bay. One of them stepped forward, an elder with silver markings along her temples. You are Jareth, friend of Kalis. Jareth nodded slowly. Then follow us, the elder said. You are now the heir to his estate, and by law, to his bond partner. Jareth blinked. Wait. What? The elder turned without answering. The others followed. Jareth stood alone for a moment. Then, with a breath he did not realize he had been holding, he stepped into a world that was never meant to be his. They led him through a corridor of glowing stone. The walls shimmered faintly with every step, casting reflections that moved slightly out of sync, as if the building remembered another time. Finally, they stopped before a tall door with no handle. The elder turned to him. You must meet her now. She has been waiting. The door opened without sound. A breath of cold air spilled out, crisp and sharp. Mist drifted across the floor. He stepped inside, and the world changed. It was a garden, but not like anything he had ever seen. Crystal trees grew from ground that glowed with soft frost. Their branches curled and shifted like they were alive. Strange flowers floated midair, suspended by nothing. The scent was strange, cool, clear, almost like snow remembered in a dream. In the center stood a fountain, shaped like a heart, broken down the middle. Beside it, she stood, Sci-Fi. Her skin shimmered like silver touched by dusk. Her long hair flowed behind her, without wind. Her eyes, bright and alien, locked onto his the moment he entered. She did not smile, but she did not look away. Jareth stopped. You are Sci-Fi? Her voice was soft, sharp, like glass shaped by song. I was bonded to Kalis. Now I am bonded to you. Jareth shook his head. I don't understand. I didn't ask for this. Nor did I, she replied. But the bond follows the will, and Kalis's will was final. He glanced around. Why here? Because this is where we shared our first memory, she said. It is where I mourned him, and now it is where I accept you. Jareth shifted, unsure if he should bow, speak, or just disappear. Accept me? I am not him. I don't know your customs. I don't belong here. Sci-Fi stepped forward, graceful but precise. Then you must learn, for everything that was his is now yours. Beside her, a flower bloomed in midair, pale blue, trembling like it had been waiting. She plucked it and held it out to him. It is tradition for the new bond to begin with a gift. Jareth hesitated. He took the flower. The moment his fingers touched it, warmth moved up his hand, through his chest. What was that? Sci-Fi stepped closer. A part of me now lives in you. You have accepted it. Jareth stared at her. This is too much. She turned, beginning to walk through the trees. Come, she said. There are things you must see. Kalis left more than treasure. He left a warning. Jareth followed her without speaking. The ice garden shifted around them, trees whispering as their crystal branches brushed against one another. The air was cool but not cold. It held something quieter than temperature, something sacred. Sci-Fi walked ahead with the silence of someone who knew every step, every breath of this place. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. They moved past glowing vines, past silent statues carved from starlight, until they reached a wall half covered in frost and soft-rooted moss. She stopped. Behind here, she said, is the vault. Kalis never spoke of it, Jareth murmured. He wasn't allowed to, she replied. She placed her hand on a smooth patch of stone. A pulse of soft light spread outward. The wall cracked, then opened. The door vanished into itself with a low hum. Behind it, a chamber glowed blue. Jareth stepped inside. The room was circular. Its walls were lined with carvings that flickered and shimmered like they were breathing. In the center, a single object floated, an orb, no larger than a fist, suspended above a carved pedestal. It spun slowly, emitting a gentle hum like a heartbeat remembering itself. This, Sci-Fi whispered, is the vault of memory. Jareth stepped forward. The orb flared brighter as he approached. It knows you, she said. Kalis told it about me. Number. She looked at him. It remembers who you are. He blinked, then the orb opened. Not with gears or panels, but like a flower blooming in silence. A beam of light projected into the air, and a familiar face appeared. Kalis, but not the soft-spoken friend from his messages. This version of Kalis looked worn, serious. His eyes were hard. If you are seeing this, Jareth, then things have gone as I feared. My death was not an accident. They came for me, and they will come for her. You must protect Selira, and you must never let the Council touch what is inside this vault. You are more important than you know. The message ended. The light faded. Jareth's voice cracked. What is in here that they want so badly? Selira turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Not what, she said. Who? Before he could ask, the lights in the chamber flickered, then died. Selira stepped in front of him, her hand already glowing with energy. They're here, she whispered. Who is here? Hunters, she said. Deathbrokers. They hunt the dead and silence those who inherit them. A sound echoed through the chamber, clicking, fast, unnatural. Something was moving in the ice garden. Jareth's breath caught. He backed away from the pedestal, the orb still pulsing faintly. What do they want? You, Selira replied. And me. And the truth inside that memory. Suddenly, the wall behind them cracked. A long, sharp blade punched through the stone. The vault door slammed shut. A thin insect-like creature dropped from the ceiling. Its body was sleek, armored in black metal, eyes glowing red. Selira struck first. A pulse of light burst from her palm, slamming the creature into the far wall. It twitched. Not dead, she muttered. Just slowed. Jareth grabbed the nearest object, a metal rod, and held it like a weapon. Another hunter dropped from above, claws scraping the floor. Jareth swung, wild, desperate. It knocked the creature back, but not down. Before it could lunge again, Selira screamed, not in fear, but in power. Her voice sliced the air. The creature froze, then cracked apart. Jareth stood, breath shaking. You fight like a warrior, he said. Selira's eyes glowed faintly. My training was never for courtship. It was for war. A third hunter crashed through the wall. They didn't hesitate. They fought, together, until the silence returned. Selira dropped to one knee, breathing heavy. We don't have much time. If more come, we won't survive. Jareth nodded. Then let's get whatever Kalis left behind, and go. She turned back to the orb, chanting softly in her native tongue. It spun faster. A beam of light projected a map, not of a planet, of galaxies, lines of ancient star paths, hidden wormholes, points of energy no human had ever charted. In the center, one phrase glowed in alien script. Selira translated. The seed of origin? Jareth frowned. What is that? Her voice was low. A living being, the last of its kind. No body, only thought. It sees futures. It remembers all truth. And Kalis left it. To me? She nodded. Because you're human, and the seed only speaks to honest blood. The chamber trembled. Another blade sliced through the ceiling. Selira shouted, Take the vault! Jareth grabbed the orb. It shrank into a sphere the size of his palm and clicked into a silver bracelet around his wrist. The moment it touched him, he felt warmth, like something old had just exhaled. Selira slammed a disc to the floor. A flash of white light consumed them both, and they vanished. They reappeared inside a dark tunnel, far below the estate. The orb on Jareth's wrist glowed, pulsing, alive. His chest rose and fell with heavy breath. His hands shook, but somewhere beneath the fear, he began to understand. This was not a gift, it was a burden, and it had chosen him. The tunnel was cold and narrow, carved deep into the roots of Sirius stone. Faint lights pulsed from moss that lined the walls, casting green shadows across Jareth's face. He walked behind Selira, the orb on his wrist glowing like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. He kept glancing down at it. It pulsed slow, steady, alive. Selira moved ahead with practiced steps, even though her breath was still ragged from the fight. Her arms bore faint burns, and a bruise bloomed along her ribs, but she didn't complain. She didn't look back. Jareth finally broke the silence. They knew we were there. Selira nodded. They always knew. They were waiting for Kalis to die. You just got here faster than they expected. He stared at her back. And if I hadn't come, She didn't turn. Then I would be dead by now. They reached the end of the tunnel. A slab of rock blocked their path. Salira touched a crystal embedded in the wall. The door slid open with a quiet hiss. A cold wind rushed in. Outside, the sky was deep purple, streaked with silver clouds and the glow of 3 moons. Below the hill, black smoke curled into the air. Jareth's heart dropped. He pointed. The estate. It's burning. Salira didn't blink. They are erasing Kalis, memory by memory, one flame at a time. They moved fast through the mountain passes. After an hour, they arrived at a hidden cave carved into the side of a cliff. The entrance was covered in thick vines. Inside, dim light flickered. Salira stepped in first. Jareth followed and froze. In the middle of the cave sat a broken-down shuttle. Its hull was scratched, the wings bent, but the symbol near the hatch shimmered faintly in the dark. Kalis's family crest. Salira ran her fingers over the metal. This was his escape ship. We were going to use it if things ever went too far. She opened a panel near the back. Inside were small silver vials, each glowing with liquid light. Fuel, she said. Just enough. But before she could reach for one, a voice echoed through the cave. You always were predictable, Salira. Jareth spun around. A tall figure stood in the entrance. Red robe, golden eyes, a calm smile that did not reach his mouth. Salira went still. Her voice dropped. Vaughn. Jareth stepped back. Who is he? My brother, she said softly. And the one who wanted Kalis dead. Vaughn walked forward with the ease of someone who believed the ending was already written. He was weak, Vaughn said. He trusted a human. He gave you his bond. And now you walk this world like you belong here. Jareth clenched his fists. He trusted me because I saved his life. What have you ever done but betray him? Vaughn chuckled. You think I care about the past? I care about that orb on your wrist. He stepped closer. Salira raised her hand, fingers glowing. Vaughn didn't flinch. You're too late, she said. It's already accepted him. That can be undone, Vaughn replied. He raised a small device. I just need to remove his arm. Jareth stepped back again. Salira moved first. A blade of light formed in her palm and she lunged. Vaughn was faster. He threw a red crystal to the ground. It exploded in a wave of sound. Jareth fell to his knees, ears ringing. Salira screamed and collapsed. She shook violently, eyes wide with pain. You used a scream crystal, she gasped. Vaughn smiled. Designed to shut down bonded ones like you. Jareth crawled to her, tried to lift her. Vaughn raised a needle gun. Say goodbye, human. But the orb on Jareth's wrist suddenly flared. White light burst from it. Vaughn was thrown backward, crashing into the cave wall. His weapon shattered. Jareth looked down. The orb had fused to his skin. His veins glowed faint gold. Inside his mind, a voice returned. You are threatened. I will protect the truth. Salira blinked, stunned. It responded to your fear. It sees you. Jareth helped her up, still shaking. We need to go. Now he grabbed the fuel vials, dragged her toward the shuttle, and slammed the door. Vaughn groaned behind them, stunned. The shuttle powered on. Lights flickered. Engines coughed. Systems woke like old gods. Jareth dropped into the pilot seat. I've never flown anything. Salira, half conscious, opened one eye. Let me guide you. The shuttle lifted off. The cave collapsed behind them in a cloud of rock and dust. Jareth gripped the controls. Salira lay beside him, head resting against the wall. Her voice was faint. I thought my brother would help me. Jareth looked at her. He doesn't see you as family. He sees you as power. She nodded weakly. Do you regret bonding with me? He asked. She opened her eyes slowly. I regret not warning you sooner. Then she looked at his wrist. The orb pulsed slowly. It has chosen you, she said. You're not just a human anymore, Jareth. You're the last voice the seed will listen to. The shuttle tore through the outer layers of Sirius Prime's atmosphere, sparks dancing across the hull as it broke free into the black beyond. Jareth sat hunched forward in the pilot seat, his hands trembling over the controls, the orb on his wrist glowing brighter with each passing second. Behind him, Salira lay strapped to a recovery bench, her body still weak from the crystal shock. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her voice was a whisper against the hum of the engines. They will follow. Jareth glanced at the scanner. 3 red blips. Already have. Celera sat up slowly, wincing. We cannot outrun them. Then maybe, Jareth said, we don't have to. The orb pulsed. Software gold. A voice entered his thoughts again. Not loud, not forceful. Just present. I will open the gate. But once we cross, we cannot return. Jareth looked to Celera. Do you trust me? She reached for his hand, her fingers finding his with quiet certainty. I trust Kaelus's trust in you. He took a deep breath. Then do it, he said aloud. The orb responded with a surge of warmth. Ahead of them, space split open, not like an explosion, but like a soft tear in fabric, revealing something behind the stars. A rift appeared, glowing with pale silver light. The stars near it warped and bent, forming impossible shapes like dreams halfway remembered. The shuttle dove in. The enemy ships fired, but missed, and Jareth was gone. When the light faded, there was no sound. Outside the windows, the sky was not black. It was deep silver, thick like fog, glittering with star-like fragments that floated instead of shined. Everything moved slowly, not drifting, breathing. Where are we? Jareth whispered. Celera stared out the glass, voice low. The Forbidden Zone. Jareth turned. That's not a real place. It's a story, a myth. She shook her head. It is real. Few enter. Fewer return. A shape emerged in the distance. Floating. Massive. Alive. A temple, if such a thing could exist in this place, spiraled like a galaxy turned to stone. Its structure made of obsidian and fractured glass, glowing softly from within. It pulsed with life, with memory, with something older than language. Jareth felt the orb on his wrist begin to hum. It remembers, he said quietly. It's calling home. The shuttle landed on a narrow platform that hovered in stillness. No guards, no gates, just silence. The door opened by itself. Jareth stood. Celera walked beside him, her movements careful, deliberate. The air felt thicker here, like walking through the breath of something sleeping. A long staircase stretched upward, disappearing into the light at the temple's heart. Jareth hesitated. What happens if I go in alone? Celera placed her hand on his chest. Then go with part of me. She removed a crystal from around her neck and placed it in his hand. If anything goes wrong, speak my name into this. He closed his fingers around it. I will come back. You'd better, she whispered with a faint smile. Jareth walked the stairs alone. Each step echoed, not just in the temple, but in his bones. Voices rose softly from the walls. Memories not his own. Faces he'd never seen. Wars that had never been told. Love. Death. Silence. At the top, he entered a wide chamber. In its center floated an orb, 10 times the size of the one on his wrist. It spun slowly, glowing in deep blue and gold, pulsing like a heartbeat that had never stopped. Jareth approached. The orb spoke. You are the human. He swallowed. Yes, you carry Kaelus's final will. Yes, you carry doubt. His voice cracked. I didn't ask for this. The orb spun slower. That is why you were chosen. A beam of light reached out, scanned him, and then his memories exploded. He saw himself, sitting alone on Earth, rain tapping against the glass. He saw Kaelus smiling for the first time after the war. He saw 1,000 small moments no one else had ever witnessed. And then he saw the seed's first thought, the first time stars were born. He saw galaxies spin into being, collapse, rebuild. He saw civilizations rise, lie, forget. He saw it all, and through it all, the seed watched, not judging, just remembering. And now, it remembered him. When he awoke, Jareth lay on the floor of the chamber. His body was cold, but inside he felt something burning. The orb on his wrist had changed. 2 lights glowed within now, one gold, one soft blue. The crystal from Celera had melted into it. The seed's voice returned, gentler now. The bond is complete. You are now the guardian. Jareth stood slowly. The platform awaited him. Celera stood at the edge, eyes fixed on the stairs. When she saw him, she smiled. You came back. He showed her the orb. We're connected now. Me, you, the seed. He looked out into the endless silver sky. We're not just running anymore. Celera touched his hand. Then we must act, before it's too late. The temple trembled, not from within, but from something approaching. Far above the silver sky of the Forbidden Zone, the horizon cracked open like glass under pressure. Shadows spilled in, not darkness, but ships, dozens of them, black, angular, wide like floating fortresses. At the front, Vaughn's warship, massive, quiet, armed with weapons meant to silence entire moons. Celera's face turned pale as she stared upward from the temple platform. He followed us, she whispered. Jareth stepped beside her, the orb on his wrist pulsing golden blue. How? Celera's voice was tight. He has spies in the Seed's network. He must have stolen part of the map. They looked at each other. Then above them, every comm channel sparked to life. Vaughn's voice echoed across the Forbidden Zone. Return the Seed, return the traitor, or this place will burn. Jareth didn't flinch. He stood on the platform, wind whipping through his hair, cloak snapping behind him. Behind him, the great spiral temple glowed softly, quiet and calm like a sleeping giant. He looked at the orb on his wrist. Can you protect us? The Seed answered slowly, ancient and steady. Only if you choose war. Celera stepped closer. If we run, we will never be safe again. Jareth took a deep breath. Then we stand. He turned to the sky and spoke 2 words. I choose. The sky answered. From behind the silver clouds, dozens of hidden ships emerged. Sleek, elegant, glowing with blue and silver marks. Kaelus's fleet, preserved in secret. Now awakened by the command only Jareth could give, Vaughn's voice snarled through the speakers. You cannot command them. You are not one of us, Jareth replied calmly. I am not. But they chose me. In the command chamber of the lead ship, Jareth stood at the helm for the first time. I've never led anything, he muttered. Celera took the console beside him, her voice quiet but clear. You didn't ask for this, but the Seed chose you, and Kaelus trusted you more than any general. Jareth stared at the display. Vaughn's ships were moving into attack formation. They're stronger, he said. Celera smiled faintly. But you're human. Jareth looked at her confused. What does that even mean? She stepped closer. It means you survive what should destroy you. It means your heart still burns after loss. It means when the galaxy forgets how to feel, you remember, Vaughn's voice returned. Final warning, hand over the Seed, or be erased from time. Jareth activated the comm. This is Jareth, guardian of memory, heir to Kaelus's legacy. You want to erase me? He stepped forward. Come try. The first shot tore through the sky. Red beams ripped past the temple's edge. Celera's fleet responded instantly. Shields snapped into place. Weapons lit up like stars being born. The air trembled with impact. The ship shook beneath their feet, but Jareth stood firm. The orb on his wrist glowed brighter. It whispered instructions. To your left, flank ship 4, send 2 squadrons forward. Jareth shouted the command, and the ships moved, not like soldiers, like instinct, like memory given form. Celera looked up from her console, breathless. Your orders are strange, but they work, he smirked. I call it winging it. Suddenly, one of Vaughn's dreadnoughts broke through. It charged toward the spiral temple, guns aimed low. It fired. A crimson beam lanced across the sky and struck the base of the spiral. The temple shook. Cracks spread along the foundation. Celera screamed, The Seed! It's exposed! The orb on Jareth's wrist detached. It floated into the air, spinning, glowing, rising above the battlefield. A voice echoed from the stars. You have passed the test. Now I remember myself. The sky ignited. From within the spiral rose a being of light, shaped like an angel carved from storm and flame. Its eyes opened, and every ship fell silent, even Vaughn's. The Seed spoke to all. You fight over my memory, But only one of you carries my truth. It turned to Jareth. Only one of you made a claim not for power, but for protection. It pointed. He is my choice, and I obey him now. Vaughn screamed. Number, I am of her blood. I am Sirius born. The seed answered like thunder. But he is bonded by heart, and you betrayed your own. Vaughn's ship began to twist. The seed did not kill him. It imprisoned him. You will not be erased. You will remember. Forever. Vaughn vanished in a flash of light, his screams swallowed by time. The battle was over. The sky went still. Celera ran to Jareth on the command platform. You did it. He looked around dazed. Number, we did. He took her hand. Together. The sky over the forbidden zone shimmered gold. Not from flames, not from battle, but from peace. The spiral temple stood untouched once more, its wounds healed by light. Above it, the silver stars drifted slowly, like memories too gentle to disturb. Around the temple, Kaelus's fleet hovered in formation, silent, still, waiting for no command now, only breath. Inside the temple, there was no ceremony, no crowds, only two people. Jareth stood near the edge of a crystal balcony, his cloak loose around his shoulders, eyes fixed on the stars. The orb on his wrist had quieted. It no longer pulsed with urgency or fear, just a faint glow, a rhythm, a heartbeat. Behind him, footsteps. He turned. Celera stood in the doorway, wearing no armor, no crest, just flowing robes of soft silver, simple and weightless. Her hair was tied back, her expression calm. You're not sleeping, she said. Jareth smiled faintly. I'm still trying to believe it's real. She walked closer. It is. He looked down at his hands. Yesterday I was fixing broken lights in a ruined apartment, and now the seed of origin listens to me. You never wanted power, she said. That's why you were the only one it could trust. He met her eyes. What happens now? We rebuild, she said, but slowly. Truth needs time. They stood in silence. Not awkward, not heavy, just real. Then Celera stepped closer. Her voice softened. At first I did not want to bond again. I was afraid to lose another piece of myself, afraid to accept someone who had not lived our wars. He listened without interrupting. But I see it now. She reached for his hand. I see what Kaelus saw. Not a warrior, not a conqueror, but a man who listens, a man who chooses softly. Jareth swallowed hard. I'm not like him, Number. You're not. That's why the seed chose you. And why? She hesitated. Why I choose you too. They stood together under the soft light of the temple. No titles between them, no duty. Just two people. One with a galaxy's memory on his wrist. One with a past she no longer feared. Jareth looked at her. Do you regret it? She smiled. Only that I didn't reach for your hand sooner. He took her hand. Not as a promise, not as possession, just presence, just truth. Later that night, they sat beside a still pool deep within the temple. The water glowed faintly. Reflected stars rippled with each breeze. Celera leaned her head against his shoulder. You said you were nothing back on Earth. I was, Jareth said quietly. Then why did you come? Because no one else did. And maybe because I wanted to matter. Just once. She closed her eyes. You matter now. Not because you were chosen, but because you chose. The stars over the forbidden zone burned brighter than they ever had. But they no longer pulsed with warning or sorrow. They pulsed with memory. From the great spiral temple at the heart of the zone, a soft golden light spread across the galaxy. It moved not like a weapon, but like a whisper, a pulse of truth, a signal not of war, but of awakening. Jareth stood on the highest platform of the temple, cloaked in black and silver, the crest of Kaelus stitched across his shoulder. The orb on his wrist glowed steadily now, no longer frantic. Its color had changed too, no longer just gold, no longer just blue, but both, bonded, whole. Below him, ships from 100 systems hovered in silence. Some were sleek and royal, some old and rusted, but they had all come for one reason, because the message had spread. The seed has chosen. Celera stood beside him, her crystal blue robes moving gently in the wind. She said nothing. She didn't have to. This moment was not about power. It was about truth. Jareth stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, but the seed carried his words into every mind. I am not a warrior, he said. I am not a king. I am not of this galaxy or of your traditions. I was a quiet man, a forgotten friend, someone who listened when no one else did. He paused. When Kalis died, he gave me something no one else had ever given: trust. And now the seed has done the same. He looked out over the gathered fleet. But I do not speak here to rule. I speak to remember. This galaxy has lost too much to silence, too much to pride, too much to those who erase instead of preserve. From this day forward, we will build not an empire, but an archive, a place where no truth is too small, no voice too quiet, no pain too inconvenient. We will not choose blood over bond. We will not forget the forgotten. He raised his hand. And I swear this, as guardian of memory, I will protect every story that still deserves to be heard. The seed rose behind him, a sun reborn. Its light flowed across the sky. And one by one, the ships knelt in the air, not in surrender, not in obedience, but in unity. That night, Jareth sat alone beneath the stars. The wind was soft, the temple quiet. The orb hovered beside him, its glow gentle. Celera joined him without a word. She sat down, her shoulder against his. You spoke well, she said. I only said what I felt, he replied. That's why it worked, she said. They stayed there for a long time, saying nothing. Above them, stars drifted like leaves on a quiet pond. And across the galaxy, the archive of memory began to open. Years later, children would visit the temple. They would walk through the great halls of preserved memory. They would listen to stories not written in books, but carried in light. And some would ask, is it true that the seed chose a human? And the answer would always be yes, because he was the only one who never wanted to own it, only to protect it. And now we ask you, if the truth of a galaxy was placed in your hands, not for power, but for trust, would you carry it? Would you listen? Would you stand for those who could no longer speak? Tell us in the comments, because sometimes the quietest person becomes the loudest echo. HFY obsession.